I'm sick of you. Get all your things out before I come back." My wife said that, then turned away and dragged her suitcase off on a trip with her lover. She claimed she needed to upgrade her life, called me pathetic. I stayed silent. No begging, no chasing. What she didn't know was that, while she was sipping champagne on the beach, I was executing a series of transfers. And when she finally came back, she screamed in horror at the sight of the person already standing there waiting. Thank you for being here with me through this story. Tell me in the comments, where are you right now and what time is it? I'd love to know who's joining me on this journey from betrayal to justice. I'm Warren Holloway. At 57, most men in my position are already thinking about retirement, about golf courses and leisurely afternoons on a boat, watching the sunset over calm waters. But I'm not most men. I'm a businessman, and the rhythm of deals and decisions runs through my veins the way morning fog rolls across Lake Otsego. My wife Vivian and I had been married for 28 years, nearly 3 decades. That's long enough to believe you know someone inside and out. Every breath, every habit, every unspoken thought. Our home in Lake Otsego stood as proof of that success. An elegant structure with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the still water. It was the kind of place people admired from the outside, imagining the happiness within. But that morning, something in the air felt different. Vivian woke with an unusual coldness. Not the kind that comes from Oregon's damp climate, but something deeper, something that seemed to radiate from inside her. We stood in the kitchen together, the coffee maker hissing and gurgling, the only sound breaking the heavy silence between us. I noticed the small things, the details that didn't add up. She didn't brush her hand against mine when she walked past the way she'd done for years without thinking. She didn't ask about my schedule for the day. Didn't inquire about the major project I'd stayed up half the night preparing for. Her eyes moved over me like I was a piece of furniture familiar, but no longer necessary. The intimacy that had woven us together for 28 years seemed to have evaporated overnight. I stood there watching her reflection in the window glass, feeling something cold settle in my chest. An instinct, a warning I tried to ignore. The morning light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. The house was beautiful, quiet, perfect even. But perfection, I was learning, can be a mask for something rotten underneath. Vivian poured her coffee without a word. She checked her phone, smiled faintly at something on the screen, a smile I didn't recognize. Then she walked past me again, not meeting my eyes, not saying goodbye, just gone. Like I was already invisible. I stood alone in that kitchen, surrounded by the trappings of a successful life, and felt the first crack in a foundation I thought was unshakable. I told myself it was just stress, work pressure, the kind of distance that married couples fall into after decades together, when comfort becomes routine and routine becomes silence. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Vivian's coldness that morning haunted me all day. I couldn't focus on spreadsheets or contracts at the office. Numbers blurred together. Conference calls felt like white noise. By mid-afternoon, I made a decision I rarely made. I left work early, hoping that maybe a surprise dinner, or simply my presence might thaw whatever ice had formed between us overnight. I eased the front door open quietly, planning to surprise her. The house was unusually still. Then I heard voices drifting from the small sitting room at the back. Vivian's voice. She was on the phone with someone, her tone lighter than it had been with me in weeks. I paused in the hallway, about to call out her name, but something in her words stopped me cold. "It's time for an upgrade, Ross." Vivian's voice carried through the doorway, sharp and clear. "I've been comfortable for too long. He's stable, predictable, but that's all he is. Nothing exciting, nothing new. Upgrade. The word hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, frozen, my briefcase still in hand. What was she talking about? A new car, a downtown condo, the home security system. But the way she said comfortable with that subtle edge of contempt made my chest tighten. She wasn't talking about things. She was talking about me. Her husband of 28 years, reduced to a word that made me sound like an old couch. Someone tolerates until something better comes along. I heard laughter on the other end of the line. Rosalind, Vivian's sister, the one who'd always looked at me like I wasn't quite good enough for the family. She thought Vivian deserved. Exactly, Vivian continued. I deserve more than comfortable. I deserve exciting. My car keys slipped from my fingers, clattering against the wooden console table with a sharp crack. The conversation stopped instantly. Vivian appeared in the doorway phone, already off, held loosely in her manicured hand. She looked at me with no trace of guilt, no embarrassment flickering across her carefully made-up face. Just a slight raise of her eyebrow and that practice smile, the one she used at cocktail parties with clients she didn't particularly like. "You're home early, Warren," she said, her tone as casual as if we'd been discussing the weather. I wanted to ask her about the upgrade. I wanted to demand what the hell she meant by comfortable, but my throat felt tight, constricted. The words wouldn't come. Instead, I walked past her, heading upstairs. I needed space. I needed to think, but when I stepped into our master bedroom, my breath caught. On the king-size bed with its expensive silk duvet, a large suitcase lay open. Next to it, Vivian's nicest clothes were folded neatly, ready to be packed. Designer labels. Her best jewelry case sat on the nightstand. She was going somewhere, a trip I knew nothing about. I stood there staring at that open suitcase, like it was a door I'd just discovered in a wall I thought was solid. A door I'd never noticed before. And now that I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. She was leaving or planning to, and she hadn't said a word. The open suitcase on the bed felt like a black hole sucking all the oxygen from the room. I stood frozen, grasping for explanations. Maybe a last-minute work trip or a quick weekend getaway with her girlfriends that she'd forgotten to mention. My mind scrambled for anything rational, anything that didn't confirm what my gut already knew. Then my eyes landed on a stack of papers sitting carelessly on her vanity. 2 printed boarding passes. I moved toward them, my fingers trembling as I picked them up. Business class, both of them. Destination Maui, Hawaii. Departure tomorrow morning early. The first pass bore the name Vivian Holloway, but the second name wasn't Warren Holloway. It was Brennan Pierce. The unfamiliar name hit me like a fist to the sternum. I sank into the chair beside the vanity, the room tilting sideways. My phone was in my hand before I consciously decided to reach for it. I typed the name into the search bar with a desperate, fragile hope that this was a distant relative, maybe a business associate I'd simply never met. The results loaded instantly. Brennan Pierce, 38 years old, a lifestyle coach with a sculpted jawline, perfect ABS, and an Instagram feed full of motivational quotes about living your truth and choosing yourself. He had 47,000 followers. His smile was white and easy. His life looked effortless, filtered, and aspirational. He was 19 years younger than me. He was the upgrade. The shock gave way quickly to denial. This couldn't be real. Not my Vivian. Not the woman who'd built a life with me, who'd promised to grow old beside me. She couldn't possibly throw away 28 years for some Instagram philosopher with a gym membership and a slogan. Maybe this was a misunderstanding. Maybe he was just coordinating the trip. Maybe. But boarding passes don't lie. Maui isn't a place you go with a lifestyle coach to discuss business strategies. Maui is where lovers go. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. Steady, unhurried, confident. In that split second, I made a choice. I slid the boarding passes back, where I'd found them, smoothing them flat, as if I'd never touched them. I forced my expression into something neutral, something that wouldn't betray the collapse happening inside my chest. I wouldn't confront her. Not yet. Not like this. Anger would make me sloppy. Emotion would give her the upper hand. The only advantage I had right now was knowledge and the fact that she didn't know I had it. I needed to watch. I needed to see how deep this went before I made a single move. Vivian appeared in the doorway. She changed into an elegant dress. Her hair swept up, her makeup flawless. She looked radiant, like someone preparing for a new chapter, a better chapter. When she saw me sitting there, she didn't flinch, didn't look guilty. She just smiled a cool, distant smile I didn't recognize from 28 years of marriage. "You're still here, Warren?" she asked, her voice light, almost airy. I looked at the woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, and I realized I was staring at a complete stranger. The room, already cold, grew suffocating as Vivian stepped fully inside. She didn't avoid my eyes anymore. Instead, she stood there facing me, arms crossed over her chest, the posture of someone who'd already decided the verdict. "Warren, we need to talk about our marriage," she said. Her voice didn't waver. It was clear, decisive, practiced. I stayed seated in the armchair, feeling my heart hammering against my ribs, but keeping my expression as neutral as I could manage. "I'm listening." She sighed, the kind of sigh that made it sound like she'd been suffering from boredom for years. "You're 57, Warren. Look at yourself. You live for work, for old routines. I'm only 48. I'm still young. I still have life ahead of me. I need something different, something more vibrant than sitting here staring at this lake day after day." I searched her eyes for some trace of regret, some flicker of nostalgia for the 28 years we'd built together. There was nothing. Something more vibrant. I echoed quietly, "Or someone younger." I almost said it. The words sat on my tongue like acid, but I swallowed them back. She wanted me to explode. She wanted anger, accusations, drama, something she could use to justify what she was about to do. I wouldn't give her that. "I'm going to Maui for a few days to think things through," she continued as casually as if she were discussing a shopping trip. "When I come back, we should start a divorce proceedings. I think it's best for both of us. You can keep the house. Keep your memories. I need to be free. Free? Such a convenient word for abandoning everything." I didn't shout, didn't throw anything. I just nodded slowly, a bitter smile pulling at the corner of my mouth. Freedom. That's a nice way to put it. My silence seemed to catch her off guard. She frowned slightly, maybe expecting more resistance, something loud, something messy that would let her walk away feeling less guilty, but I didn't give her that satisfaction. I just sat there watching the woman I'd once worshipped transform into an ambitious stranger I barely recognized. She turned away, pulling the suitcase toward the door. The sound of wheels rolling across the hardwood floor was sharp, rhythmic, like the ticking of a clock, counting down to something irreversible. She walked down the stairs. Her heels clicked steadily against each step. I stood and moved to the window, watching as she slipped into the taxi, waiting in the driveway. She didn't look back. Not once. No wave, no goodbye. No acknowledgement that 28 years of shared life deserved even a glance over her shoulder. The car rolled away, disappearing into the early morning mist that always hung over Lake Otsego this time of year. I stood there alone in the vast, beautiful house we built together, feeling the emptiness spread through every corner. She didn't say goodbye. The truth was, she hadn't said goodbye in a long time. Maybe months, maybe longer. I'd just been too comfortable, too predictable to notice. What do you say when your wife tells you you're expired? When she looks at you like your furniture, she's outgrown. I stood there in the silence, the lake outside reflecting the gray sky, and I realized something important. Silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. After the taxi carrying Vivian disappeared behind the trees, I didn't allow myself to collapse. In business, when a partner suddenly breaks a contract, the first thing you do isn't sit around mourning. It's assess the damage and find expert counsel. I picked up my phone and called Vincent Hughes. Vincent had been my closest friend since our days at the University of Oregon. Now at 58, he was one of the sharpest strategic minds I knew. If anyone could help me keep a clear head right now, it was Vince. We agreed to meet at Stumptown Coffee Roasters in downtown Portland. The place was buzzing with the usual crowd. Freelancers hunched over laptops, baristas calling out complicated orders, the rich smell of fresh ground beans filling the air. Normally, I found the energy comforting. Today it was just noise. I couldn't quite filter out. Vincent sat in the corner, perfectly composed in a tailored charcoal suit, an espresso already waiting in front of him. His silver hair was neat, his expression unreadable. He'd always had that quality, the ability to listen without judgment, to observe without showing his hand. I slid into the seat across from him and got straight to it. No preambles, no emotional detours. I kept it factual. Vivian's coldness, the phone call with her sister, the sudden trip to Maui, the declaration of divorce delivered like a weather report. She wants to end 28 years with a vacation announcement. I said, my voice flat. Vincent listened without interruption, his eyes narrowing slightly behind his expensive frames. He didn't offer platitudes or sympathetic nods. He knew I wasn't here for pity. I understand, Warren, he said, finally setting his cup down with precision. In situations like this, emotion is the enemy of assets. Let me refer you to some attorneys. Not your average family lawyers. I'm talking about specialists who handle complex divorces with significant estates. People who will make sure she doesn't walk away with a single dollar more than she's legally entitled to. He didn't elaborate on what else he might be able to help with beyond legal strategy. But I knew Vincent. He always had cards he didn't show until the right moment. He saw things other people missed. I nodded, absorbing the advice, already mentally shifting into the mode I used when negotiating difficult deals. Detachment, strategy, control. As I stood to leave, Vincent's hand landed on my shoulder. His grip was firm, his gaze suddenly sharp. Warren, he said, pulling me back. Before you start this fight, ask yourself something honestly. I waited. How well do you really know your wife? The question hit me like cold water. I'd lived with Vivian for 28 years. Shared a bed, shared a home, shared what I thought was a life. But that cold look in her eyes this morning, the secret plans with a man I'd never heard of at all, made me realize I might only know the version of her she'd wanted me to see. I stood there unable to answer. Vincent didn't push. He just leaned back, his expression thoughtful, almost sad. Think about it, he said quietly. I walked out of Stumptown into the gray Portland afternoon. The city noise swirling around me, car horns, street musicians, the hiss of a MAX train pulling into the station, but all I could hear was Vincent's question echoing in my mind like a warning. How well did I know her? And more importantly, what else was she hiding? I told myself I wouldn't check. Vincent's question still echoed in my head as I sat in the library that second night, the villa silent except for the low hum of the heater and the faint creak of settling wood. Outside, the lake reflected the dying light of another Oregon sunset, all amber and bruised purple. Inside, I sat in the dark, the glow from my phone, the only light against my face. How well do you really know your wife? I knew I shouldn't look, knew it would hurt, but curiosity, painful, relentless curiosity won. And there it was, right at the top of my feed. Vivian had posted. The photo was pristine, professional even. While beach at sunset, the kind of picture that gets sold on postcards. Brennan Pierce stood behind her, one arm wrapped around her waist, his hand resting possessively on her hip. She leaned into him, head tilted back, laughing. Her hair caught the golden light, her skin glowing. She looked radiant, younger, free. The caption read, "Finally living my truth. Authenticity over comfort. New beginnings. Living my best life, Maui." I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. The comments rolled in like a wave. Our friends congratulated her. "So happy for you, and you deserve this. And it's about time." One even said, "New chapter, new adventures." No one asked about me. Not one person. 28 years. I protected her, provided for her, built a life with her, and now I was the obstacle. The old couch she'd finally replaced. The outdated model she'd traded in for something sleeker, shinier, younger. I set the phone down on the armrest, my hand shaking. Pain, sharp, white-hot pain flooded my chest first, but it didn't stay. It cooled, hardened, turned into something colder, something calculated. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This was public humiliation, a declaration. She wasn't hiding it. She was celebrating it, and she expected me to sit here quietly while she paraded her upgrade across social media like a trophy. I exhaled slowly, stood and walked to my desk. The laptop sat, closed the screen dark. I opened it, the glow washing over my hands as the system booted up. If Vivian wanted to play this publicly, fine, but I wasn't going to sit in the dark and take it. I typed Brennan Pierce's name into the search bar. Instagram first. 47,000 followers, lifestyle coach, mindset mentor, post full of shirtless selfies, motivational quotes, and carefully curated beach sunsets. He looked like he'd walked out of a supplement ad, then LinkedIn. Freelance, no steady income listed. A few endorsements, nothing concrete. I kept digging. Court records, financial databases, public filings. I wasn't being reckless. I was being strategic. Vincent was right. Emotion was the enemy of assets, but knowledge was power. And I was done being the man left in the dark. The game had just begun. The laptop screen cast a pale glow across my face as I leaned back in the leather chair. Brennan Pierce's polished online resume told me one thing clearly. The man was all surface, no substance. But surfaces cost money. And that's when it hit me. In business, cash flow never lies. It always leaves a trail, no matter how carefully you try to hide it. I navigated to our joint bank account, the one I'd been religiously depositing into every month for years. The one Vivian used for household expenses and her personal spending. I pulled up the transaction history for the past 24 months. At first glance, everything looked normal. Groceries, utilities, the usual. But then I started filtering for larger amounts, cross-referencing them against my own calendar. And that's when the picture began to emerge. Over the past 18 months, a total of $340 had been withdrawn or spent on expenses I couldn't account for. $340,000. That wasn't shopping for dresses or salon visits. That was systematic bleeding. I scrolled through the statements, my blood turning cold. Line after line of 5-star restaurant charges in Portland. Stays at boutique hotels right here in the city where Brennan Pierce ran his so-called coaching practice. Recurring payments to high-end men's fashion stores, and then buried among the rest. Multiple transactions at Tiffany & Co. She'd been funding him, buying him tailored suits, paying for their romantic dinners, bankrolling their entire affair, possibly even this Maui trip with my money. Money I'd earned building a business from the ground up while she played house. The emotional betrayal had been a gut punch, but this was a knife in the back, twisted slow. I clicked print, the printer word in the silent darkness, spitting out page after page of evidence. Each line, each number a damning indictment of the woman I'd trusted with everything. I stood and crossed to the small safe hidden behind a painting in the library, the place where Vivian kept receipts, invoices, things she said she'd get to eventually for tax season. I rifled through the stack of envelopes stuffed in the back, and then I found it. A small Tiffany blue receipt dated 3 weeks ago. $18 million. A diamond bracelet. I remembered that day. Vivian had told me she was having lunch with Rosalind, consoling her after a bad breakup. But I'd never seen her wear that bracelet. And it wasn't in her suitcase when she left for Maui. This wasn't some impulsive affair, fueled by midlife crisis or a need for validation. This was calculated financial fraud. Vivian had been draining our marriage for over a year, preparing her exit strategy on my dime. I held the receipt in my hand, the paper crinkling under the pressure of my grip. She wanted a new beginning fine, but she'd be starting it at zero. The $18,000 Tiffany receipt was just the tip of the iceberg. As cold fury settled into my bones, the businessman in me took over. I knew Vivian. She wouldn't stop at draining bank accounts or buying jewelry. If she decided to leave this marriage, she'd want to take the throne with her. And while she was sipping Mai Tais on a Maui beach with her boy toy, I had access to everything. I walked straight into her home office, a space I'd always respected as her private domain, never once stepping inside, uninvited in 28 years. I opened the oak filing cabinet where we kept property deeds, investment records, and tax documents. I flipped through folder after folder, and then my heart stopped. A dark blue folder inside the most recent copy of the deed to our Lake Oswego home, our most valuable asset worth over $4 million. I rubbed my eyes, certain I was misreading it, but no, my name was gone. The house was now solely in the name of Vivian Holloway. I flipped to the signature page. There next to my name was a signature that looked exactly like mine. The underline, the slant of the letters, the slight loop in the H, but I'd never signed this document. I knew that with absolute certainty. I looked at the date 6 months ago. 6 months ago, I'd been in Chicago for 2 weeks closing a critical merger deal. I'd barely slept. I'd worked 16-hour days, and while I was doing that, Vivian had been here quietly erasing me from our home. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision born out of marital unhappiness. This was a meticulously planned, coldly executed scheme that had been in motion for half a year. Vivian had forged my signature. She'd stolen our house. Our house while I was working 70-hour weeks to maintain the lifestyle she'd grown so accustomed to. The shock of this hit harder than seeing her kiss Brennan Pierce on Instagram. An affair was emotional betrayal, but forgery property theft. That was a felony. She hadn't just wanted an upgrade. She'd wanted to destroy me financially and leave me with nothing. Everything clicked into place now. The coldness, the secret phone calls with Rosalind, the systematic cash withdrawals. They were all steps in a carefully calculated campaign. I pulled out my phone, my hands no longer shaking with pain, but steady with resolve. I photographed every page of the forged deed, zooming in on the fake signature and the date. I attached them all to an email addressed to Vincent Hughes. The subject line was short, but it carried the weight of a declaration of war. We need to talk immediately. I leaned back in the chair and stared out at the dark lake. Vivian thought she'd won. Thought she'd outmaneuvered me. Thought she could erase 28 years and walk away with everything while I sat here like a fool. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail. I didn't get where I am today by letting people walk over me. Her Maui vacation was about to end in a legal nightmare she never saw coming. The next morning, I found myself on the top floor of the Wells Fargo Tower in downtown Portland. Vincent had arranged the meeting within hours of my email. Unlike the bustle of Stumptown coffee, this place was silent enough to hear your own breathing. Vincent was waiting for me alongside a silver-haired man with a military-sharp haircut and eyes like razors. "Warren, this is Walter Pembroke," Vincent said, the best property litigation and financial crimes attorney in the state. "If anyone can turn that forged deed into a noose, it's Walter." Walter Pembroke, 62, didn't waste time on pleasantries. He spread the documents I'd emailed the night before across a massive mahogany table. He used a magnifying glass to examine the forged signature on the deed, his expression unreadable. "Forgery in Oregon carries a sentence of 3 to 5 years. Walter began, his voice growly but commanding, combined with financial fraud to seize jointly owned property. "We can not only void this deed, but demand full restitution of the funds she drained. However, if we go the traditional litigation route, she'd be notified immediately, and she'd have time to liquidate other assets." I laced my fingers together, forcing myself to stay calm. "I don't want to just sue her. I want her to lose everything before she realizes what's happening." Walter's lips curved into a smile, cold, calculated, without warmth. "Then we use her own weapon against her. On paper, she's the sole owner now. That means she has the legal right to sell the house. But we're going to execute an emergency transfer to a third party immediately, based on evidence of marital breach and fraudulent acquisition." "Transfer to who?" I raised an eyebrow. "Who has the resources in the trust to hold a $4 million asset during a legal dispute?" Walter glanced at Vincent, then back at me. "Do you trust Vincent Warren?" "We've prepared a legal trust entity under a confidential buyer. This buyer will hold the property legally, stripping Vivian of any ability to use it as collateral or as a residence when she returns." I looked at Vincent. He nodded, once silent reassurance built on nearly 40 years of friendship. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I signed the emergency property transfer authorization. I still didn't know the real identity of the buyer behind the trust. But at this point, I was willing to bet on anyone as long as it wasn't Vivian. "Done," Walter said, gathering the contracts with the satisfaction of a hunter who just set the perfect trap. "Within 72 hours, the house will be legally protected. When your wife lands from Maui, she'll find that the key in her purse won't open the door at Lake Oswego anymore." I walked out of that office, feeling a new kind of power coursing through my veins. The plan was in motion, and Vivian had no idea the ground had just shifted beneath her feet. When I returned home from Walter Pembroke's office, the mansion felt less like a fortress and more like a mausoleum. I sat in my study, watching the sunset cast blood-red streaks across the hardwood floors. A tentative knock broke the suffocating silence. It was Denise Kramer, our housekeeper for the past 12 years. At 46, Denise wasn't just staff. She was someone I'd trusted like family. She'd been there for Tamara's high school graduation, for holiday dinners, for every quiet morning coffee ritual. But today, she stood in the doorway with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. She burst into tears before I could say a word. "Mr. Holloway, I can't keep it in anymore. My conscience won't let me." I stayed seated, instinct telling me another truth was about to surface. "Sit down, Denise. Tell me what's going on." Her voice broke with every sentence, each word cutting like glass. She confessed that she'd known about Brennan Pierce for 10 months. He hadn't just existed on Instagram or in 5-star restaurants. He'd been here in my home, in my bed. Every time I traveled for business, Mrs. Holloway threatened me, Denise said, wiping her eyes. She said if I told you anything, she'd accuse me of stealing and fire me without severance or references. I I need this job, Mr. Holloway. I've got my mother in Vancouver. She's sick. I couldn't risk it. 10 months. For nearly a year, the person I trusted most in this house had watched my wife bring her lover into our bedroom. And every time I came home, Denise had smiled, poured my coffee, acted like nothing had happened. The pain of betrayal surged again, but this time it carried something darker. Isolation. Do you know what your silence was, Denise? I said, my voice so cold it didn't sound like my own. It wasn't loyalty. It was complicity. She flinched as if I'd struck her. I'm so sorry, Mr. Holloway. I was terrified. But when I saw her post those photos from Maui, I couldn't live with it anymore. You're a good man. You didn't deserve this. Her guilt offered now felt too little too late. In this game, the people who stood on the sidelines and said nothing sometimes inflicted deeper wounds than the ones who wielded the knife. Will you keep me on? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at the woman who'd been part of my household for over a decade and felt something irreparable break. I need time to think, Denise. Right now, I can't trust anyone in this house. She bowed her head and left quietly, the door clicking shut like the end of a chapter. I sat alone in the dark as night fell over Lake Otsego. Vincent's question echoed in my mind. How well do you really know your wife? And now I had to ask another. How well do I know anyone around me? The isolation pressed in on me in this multi-million-dollar house surrounded by expensive furniture and 28 years of memories. I realized I was a stranger living among wolves and human skin. The isolation from Denise's confession still lingered, but I didn't have time to wallow. My phone buzzed. Vincent, get to Walter's office now. Everything's done. There's something you need to know. When I walked into the conference room, the atmosphere felt different, less tense, almost victorious. Walter was reorganizing a thick stack of files. Vincent stood by the window, looking down at the rush hour traffic crawling through downtown Portland. It's done, Walter said, sliding a transaction confirmation across the table. The Lake Oswego property has been officially transferred to a legal entity called VH, Strategic Trust. Your wife no longer has any ownership claim to the house. I nodded, but curiosity noted at me. So who's behind the trust? You said it was a buyer I could trust. Vincent turned from the window and looked me straight in the eye. A faint smile crossed his calm face. It's me, Warren. I'm the buyer. I froze? You? Why would you do that? You dropped millions on a house in the middle of a legal war. Not a purchase in the traditional sense, Vincent said, his voice steady and warm. I used my personal investment fund to execute a conditional sale. It was the only way to legally protect this asset from Vivian's control immediately without waiting months for court orders. By doing this, the house is out of her hands legally. Once everything's settled, divorce fraud charges all of it. I'll transfer it back to you for $1. I went silent. 35 years of friendship, and I'd always known Vincent was loyal. But this was beyond anything I'd imagined. You did all of this just to help me. We've been friends since we shared ramen in the UO dorms, Warren, Vincent said, putting a hand on my shoulder. I wasn't going to stand by and watch some smooth-talking con artist and your cheating wife take everything you've built. He paused, then pulled another envelope from his briefcase. And there's more. While Walter handled the paperwork, I hired a private investigator to follow them in Maui. We don't just have social media photos anymore. We have evidence that Brennan's been funneling money from your accounts into his so-called business ventures, ghost projects that don't exist. Nye, this isn't just an affair, Warren. It's organized fraud, and Vivian's either a co-conspirator or a mark. The new truth hit me like a shockwave. I didn't feel isolated anymore. I had the best people in my corner, and they were preparing a finishing blow Vivian would never see coming. "She's landing tomorrow morning," Vincent said, glancing at his watch before turning back to me with sharp, cold eyes. "Everything's in place. Locks changed. Security upgraded. Account freeze orders, ready to execute the moment she touches down at PDX. Are you ready, Warren?" I took a deep breath, feeling the steel return to my spine. "I'm ready. It's time to end this." While Vincent and I were going over the final steps of the plan, my phone buzzed on the mahogany table. The name on the screen made my chest tighten. Tamara, our daughter, 26 years old, a promising young attorney in San Francisco. I'd always tried to shield her from the uglier parts of the business world, and more than anything, I'd never wanted her to witness the collapse of her family. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hey, Mara," I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "Dad." Her voice trembled on the other end, a tremor I hadn't heard since she was little and afraid of the dark. "Dad, what's going on?" "I just saw a post on Instagram. A friend tagged me in a photo of Mom. She's in Hawaii with a man named Brennan." Silence filled Walter's office. I glanced at Vincent. He exhaled slowly and nodded with quiet sympathy. The truth had escaped my control. It had traveled all the way to San Francisco through the algorithms of social media. "Yes, Mara," I said, my voice dropping. "Your mother's in Maui. Dad, who is that man? Why is she looking at him like that?" Her voice cracked, then sharpened into something colder, sharper, lawyerly. "She's cheating on you, isn't she? People are talking online. They're saying he's her new boyfriend. Tell me the truth." The pain of Vivian's betrayal flared again, but this time it was for my daughter's suffering. I could have dumped it all on her right then. The bank statements, the forged deed, every piece of evidence, but I didn't. I wouldn't weaponize my daughter in this war. "Mara, listen to me," I said slowly, carefully. "I'm not going to ask you to pick sides or believe me right now. I want you to keep a cool head the way I taught you. Don't just look at photos. Find the truth yourself when you're ready. But I can confirm one thing: your mother and I are standing at a crossroads we can't come back from." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing fast and shallow. Finally, she spoke again, and her voice had regained the steel of a Holloway lawyer. "I'm flying home tomorrow morning," she said. "I need to be there. I can't let you face this alone, and I need to hear Mom explain this to my face." "I understand. I'll pick you up at the airport," I said, knowing that tomorrow morning was going to be a legal and emotional battlefield. I hung up and stood walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows of Walter's office. The city lights were beginning to flicker on below, but my mind was fixed on the house in Lake Oswego, where tomorrow the perfect veneer of a happy family would finally shatter. I looked at my reflection in the glass. A 7-year-old man who just lost his wife of 28 years, discovered he'd been betrayed financially and emotionally, and now had to face his daughter's pain. But in those eyes, there was no shock or anguish anymore, only cold resolve. Tomorrow, when the plane from Maui touched down, every lie would come due. Tomorrow, it would all end. The black luxury sedan rolled slowly up the cobblestone driveway of the Lake Oswego estate. It was mid-morning. The kind of crisp Oregon or mist still clung to the surface of the lake behind the house. Sunlight filtered through the Douglas firs lining the property, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Vivian stepped out, her skin glowing with a fresh Maui tan, her eyes bright with smug satisfaction. She looked like a woman who just won something. Beside her, Brennan Pierce emerged, adjusting the collar of his expensive linen shirt and taking in the sprawling architecture with barely concealed hunger. "This is your place," he said, his voice dripping with admiration and greed. "Damn, Viv, I didn't know it was this nice." Vivian smiled, the smile of a conqueror. She laced her fingers through his and pulled him toward the front door. Our place, Brennan. Soon everything here will be ours. Warren's a creature of habit. He'll accept reality and move on. She reached into her Chanel bag and pulled out the smart key, the same key that had opened this door for over a decade. For Vivian, this wasn't just unlocking a house. It was unlocking the next chapter of her carefully orchestrated life. She inserted the key into the lock. A dry click sounded, but instead of the smooth hum of the electronic deadbolt, the LED ring around the keyhole blinked red. Vivian's smile faltered. Probably a dead battery, she muttered, trying again. Red light flashing. She punched the keypad code. The system beeped sharply. Error. What's wrong, babe? Brennan asked, his tone shifting to impatience. I don't know. This is weird. Vivian's voice tightened. She tried again and again. Her hands began to tremble. She shoved the heavy oak door with her shoulder, but it didn't budge. Every attempt hit the same wall. The security system had been changed at its core. Her confidence evaporated, replaced by a creeping dread that crawled up her spine. This wasn't a malfunction. This was intentional. Warren opened the door. She shouted, pounding on the wood. I know you're in there. Stop playing games. Brennan stepped back, his eyes darting to the security cameras mounted above the entrance. All of them aimed directly at them. He was starting to realize that Vivian's perfect plan might not be so perfect after all. Just as Vivian's panic reached its peak, a sound came from inside, the deadbolt sliding open. She held her breath, hoping it was Warren coming out so she could unleash her fury. Then the chandelier in the entry hall blazed a lifelight flooding through the frosted glass panels of the door. A tall silhouette appeared on the other side, motionless, imposing like a judge, waiting to deliver a verdict. Vivian froze. Her breath came fast and shallow. That shadow didn't look like the passive husband she thought she'd controlled for 28 years. It was the shape of someone who held the power. The door handle turned slowly from the inside, and the door swung open. The heavy oak door swung open. Cold white light from the entry hall spilled out onto the porch, washing over Vivian and Brennan where they stood frozen on the steps. I stepped into the doorway, filling the frame. I wasn't wearing pajamas or the look of a broken man. I was in a tailored suit, charcoal gray, press sharp, like I was about to walk into the most important board meeting of my life. Vivian took a few seconds to recover. Then she lunged forward, her voice shrill. Warren, what the hell did you do to the locks? Let me in right now. Do you have any idea how exhausted I am after that flight? I didn't move. My eyes locked onto hers cold and unblinking. You're not getting in, Vivian. And you're never getting in again. This isn't your house anymore. Vivian laughed a sharp, mocking sound. She turned to Brennan as if looking for backup. Have you lost your mind? This is our house. I've lived here for 15 years, and I have legal rights to every square foot of this property. For the first time, I shifted my gaze to the man standing beside her, Brennan Pierce. In person, he looked even thinner and more fake than his Instagram photos. He was trying to puff himself up, trying to look intimidating, but his eyes kept darting around. Fear, pure fear. 38 years old, I said slowly, my voice even but laced with steel. A lifestyle coach. You picked the wrong mark, Brennan. You look fit. I'll give you that. But you're not smart enough to play this game. Watch your mouth, old man, Brennan said, stepping forward. But he froze the second he saw the unnerving calm in my face. Vivian shrieked, cutting through the tension. Don't you threaten him, Warren. You need to remember that my name is on the deed to this house. I'm the sole owner now. If you don't step aside, I'm calling the police for trespassing." I smiled. Bitter, cold, victorious. "That deed you're talking about? The one you signed 6 months ago while I was in Chicago." "Vivian, that's a forged deed. You faked my signature, and in the world of adults, that's called a felony." Vivian's face went from flushed red to ghostly white in an instant. Her lips trembled, trying to form a denial, but her throat seemed to close up. She hadn't expected me to discover it so quickly, and she certainly hadn't expected me to throw it in her face right here on the front steps. Just then, a pair of headlights swept up the driveway. Another black Mercedes pulled in and parked directly behind Vivian's car. The door opened, and Vincent Hughes stepped out, holding a leather briefcase. He walked with measured confidence every step, exuding the authority of someone who'd come to finish the game. Vincent stood beside me, nodded once in my direction, then turned to face Vivian with the cold gaze of a judge. "Hello, Vivian," Vincent said, his voice calm to the point of being chilling. "I think we have quite a bit of paperwork to fill out tonight and a few notices from the district attorney's office to deliver." Vincent stepped onto the stone porch and stood shoulder to shoulder with me. He wasn't in a hurry. Every movement was deliberate, and the air around us seemed to thicken with invisible pressure. "Let me clarify something for you, Vivian," Vincent said, his voice cold and razor-sharp. "I'm standing here as Warren's strategic advisor and as the legal representative of the sole, lawful owner of this property as of 48 hours ago. You are currently standing on private land without permission." Vincent set his briefcase on the small porch table and clicked it open with a dry snap. He pulled out a thick stack of documents and began laying them out like a prosecutor presenting a death sentence. "First," Vincent said, pointing to a forensic handwriting analysis, "this is a report from a certified forensic examiner. The signature on the deed you're so confident about is a clumsy forgery. We have proof you executed this while Warren was in Chicago 6 months ago. Forgery in Oregon carries a sentence of 3 to 5 years in prison." Vivian stepped back, gripping the door frame, her eyes wide with horror. But Vincent wasn't done. "Second," he said, pulling out a stack of bank statements covered in red highlights. $340,000 withdrawn over the past 18 months. We've traced every charge: Tiffany receipts, 5-star restaurants, boutique hotels where you and this man spent your time." And Vincent glanced at Brennan with utter contempt. "We also have printed emails between you and Rosalind discussing how to bleed Warren's assets to fund your boy toy. Here, that's financial fraud and embezzlement, Vivian, and you'll be paying back every single cent." Brennan, who'd been trying to maintain some composure, completely crumbled. He looked at Vivian like she was diseased. "What forged signatures?" 18 months. You told me you were divorced. You told me this house was yours. You lied to me." Vincent turned to Brennan, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "Mr. Pierce, don't play the victim so fast. As the direct beneficiary of embezzled funds and an active participant in this scheme, you're facing charges of conspiracy to commit fraud 2 to 4 years. Our private investigator has footage of you in Maui using credit cards in Warren's name. You're complicit." The moment Brennan heard prison, every trace of his polished lifestyle coach persona evaporated. He didn't even look at Vivian. He turned on his heel and sprinted toward the black sedan, still idling in the driveway. A rat abandoning a sinking ship, leaving Vivian standing alone in the wreckage. Vivian watched him go, then turned back to me. Her eyes were hollow, now stripped of everything: confidence, arrogance, hope. 28 years of marriage, months of calculated, scheming dreams of a glittering upgrade. All of it collapsed at her feet in a matter of minutes. "Warren, she whispered, her legs buckling. Vivian sank onto the stone steps, her carefully styled hair falling across her face. Just then, from the entrance to the Lake Ogo estate, Red and blue lights began flashing, cutting through the quiet morning. The wail of police sirens echoed up the driveway, signaling that justice wasn't just coming in the form of legal documents. It was coming with handcuffs. The sirens cut off as 2 Lake Oswego police patrol cars pulled in behind Vincent's Mercedes. 3 officers stepped out, flashlights sweeping across the estate before settling on the group standing on the porch. A middle-aged officer, clearly the senior, approached. We received a report of document forgery and property theft, the officer said, his eyes moving between Warren and Vincent. Vincent stepped forward, his demeanor utterly professional. He presented his Bar Association card and the stack of prepared documents. I'm Vincent Hughes, legal counsel for the owner of this property. This is evidence that Mrs. Vivian Holloway forged her husband's signature on a property deed and executed fraudulent financial transactions totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. Everything has been verified by a certified forensic examiner and notarized. Vivian, still on the stone steps, suddenly scrambled to her feet. She lunged for my arm, her voice breaking into panic. Warren, you can't do this. We're married. Don't 28 years mean anything to you? I'm sorry. He seduced me. I was manipulated. Warren, please tell them to leave. She began sobbing, tears streaking down her expensive foundation, now smeared and ruined. I was so afraid of getting old. I just wanted to feel alive again. I didn't mean to hurt you. I looked down at the woman kneeling before me and felt nothing but a hollow emptiness. You weren't afraid of losing what we had, Vivian, I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. You just wanted to take everything that was mine to feed your own selfishness. 28 years was a life to me, but to you it was just a transaction you wanted to liquidate early. The officer, after reviewing Vincent's documents, turned to Vivian. Mrs. Holloway, you're under arrest on suspicion of first-degree forgery and felony theft. You have the right to remain silent. The sharp click of steel handcuffs echoed in the night. Vivian screamed a desperate broken sound as the cuffs locked around her wrists. She was led away, stumbling down the cobblestone driveway she'd confidently claimed as hers just minutes before. When the patrol car door slammed shut, I stood there motionless. No triumph, no vindication, just a painful relief like cutting out a tumor that had been rotting inside me. The red and blue lights continued to flash, casting eerie reflections on the tall windows of the house. Just then, another car rolled slowly up the driveway. A taxi. The door opened immediately. Tamara stepped out. She froze, staring at her mother sitting in the back of the police car, then turned to look at me and Vincent. Her face was pale under the street lights, her eyes wide with shock and hurt. Dad, she said softly, her voice trembling in the cold Portland night. Tamara didn't wait for the taxi to fully stop. She threw open the door and ran across the cobblestone driveway, her breath coming fast, eyes wide as she watched the patrol car begin to roll away with her mother in the back seat. Dad, what's happening? She shouted, her voice cracking with fear and exhaustion. Why are the police taking Mom? I saw the lights from the end of the street, but I couldn't believe. I stepped down from the porch and opened my arms. Tamara collapsed into them, trembling. I'm sorry you had to see this, Mara. I was supposed to pick you up at the airport tomorrow morning, but I forgot you've always been the most impatient one in the family. I drove through the night from Seattle, Tamara said, pulling back and wiping her eyes. Her voice was steadying the sharpness of a lawyer returning. After I called you, I couldn't just sit there. I remembered I still had access to Mom's old iCloud account and her laptop at my apartment in San Francisco. Dad, I saw everything. I stared at my daughter, surprised. What did you see? Email drafts between Mom and Aunt Rosalind, Tamara said, her voice breaking. They were planning to transfer this house out of your name last year. Mom even asked Rosalind how to find someone to forge a notary seal. I didn't want to believe it. I kept hoping I was wrong. But when I saw that man, Brennan, posting photos from Maui, I checked the education fund Mom manages. It's almost empty, Dad. She started crying again, but this time it was shame and heartbreak. I'm so sorry, Dad. I was too far away, too wrapped up in my career to see what she was doing to you, to us. I pulled her close and held her tight. It's not your fault, Mara. It was never your fault. Your mother made her own choices. Now she has to face the consequences. Just then, the patrol car rolled past us. Vivian pressed her face against the rear window, her eyes wild, screaming her daughter's name. Tamara, you have to help me. Tell them your father is lying. Mara, save me. Tamara froze. She looked at her mother through the glass, the woman who'd raised her, the woman she'd once idolized. A fierce internal struggle played out on her young face. But then she took a deep breath. Her trembling shoulders steadied. Slowly, she turned her back on the car and faced me and Vincent. I love you, Mom, Tamara said toward the retreating car, though she knew her mother couldn't hear clearly. But I'm a lawyer and I'm Dad's daughter. I cannot and will never defend what's wrong, even if it's you. The patrol car's siren wailed as it disappeared beyond the trees at the Lake Otsego exit, taking with it Vivian's betrayal and all her hollow illusions. The space fell silent again, save for the wind rustling through the leaves and the soft lapping of waves from the lake. Vincent stepped beside us and placed a quiet hand on my shoulder. The three of us stood there in the driveway, our shadows stretching long under the streetlights. It was over. The 28-year play had ended in the most painful way possible. But looking at the resolve in Tamara's eyes, I knew I wasn't alone. The storm had passed, leaving wreckage in its wake. But it had also swept away the lies that had surrounded us for so long. It was over. But I knew the hardest part, rebuilding a life from these ashes, had only just begun. A week had passed since that chaotic night. The air at Lake Otsego still carried the weight of something broken. I returned to my home office, trying to work through the backlog of paperwork. But every object in the room was a reminder of betrayal. A knock came at the door. Denise stepped in holding a white envelope. Her face was gaunt, her eyes unable to meet mine. Mr. Holloway, this is my resignation, Denise said, setting the envelope on the desk, her voice trembling. After everything that happened, I don't have the face to stay here anymore. I looked at the letter, then at the woman who'd managed this house for 12 years. A long silence filled the room. I'm not firing you, Denise, I said slowly. But you need to understand that in my world, silence isn't just keeping secrets. It's complicity. You watched her bring another man into my home, spend my money, and you chose to stand by and watch. I was so afraid. Denise choked out. Fear doesn't excuse betrayal of trust, I said, cutting her off and pushing the letter back toward her. I accept this. I'll send you a fair severance package, but our relationship ends here. I can't live in a house where I have to doubt the person making my coffee. Denise bowed her head and left the room quietly. Her footsteps faded and disappeared. I knew that from now on, trust had become a luxury not everyone could afford. That afternoon, I met with Walter Pembroke at his office. Walter slid a thick file stamped in red across the table. Good news, Vincent's completed the transfer back to you, Walter said, removing his glasses to clean them. You're the sole legal owner again. As for Vivian, the preliminary hearing on forgery and fraud charges is next month. The evidence is overwhelming. She doesn't stand a chance. And Brennan Pierce, he's negotiating to testify against Vivian in exchange for a reduced conspiracy sentence. He's willing to sell her out to save himself. I just nodded. Brennan's pathetic turn wasn't surprising. People who come together through lies usually end by betraying each other. That evening, I had dinner with Tamara at a quiet riverside restaurant. She looked tired, but more at peace. "I think you should sell the house, Dad," Tamara said after a long silence. "It's too big for one person, and it holds too many ghosts. You need a real fresh start." "I've been thinking the same thing," I said, smiling, feeling the only warmth left in my life. "Maybe I'll move to a smaller place downtown, or even travel for a while." "What about you?" "I'm going back to San Francisco tomorrow," she said, taking my hand. "But I'll visit often." "We're going to be okay, Dad." After seeing Tamara off, I returned to the Lake Owego house. I walked through each room, now cleaned and cleared. Vivian's belongings had been boxed and shipped away. The shared photos had been removed, leaving only lighter patches on the walls. The house was empty now, my footsteps echoing in the loneliness. I stood by the large window, overlooking the dark lake where fog was beginning to settle. This house had once been a symbol of my success. Now it was just a soulless shell. I took a deep breath and felt freedom for the first time in 28 years, an expensive freedom full of bitterness. I reached for the final light switch and turned it off. Darkness swallowed the space, but in my mind, a new path was gradually appearing. The distant sound of a train whistle echoed through the bustling energy of the Pearl District. I stood on the balcony of my new 12th floor apartment, sipping my morning coffee and watching the Willamette River drift lazily below. This place was a quarter the size of the Lake Oswego mansion, but to me it felt strangely vast, because it no longer held lies or the weight of betrayal. I'd furnished the apartment in a minimalist style, only the books I truly loved, a comfortable leather sofa, and framed photos capturing happy moments with my daughter. Tamara visited more often now. She'd bring case files to discuss over coffee, or we'd simply cook a quiet dinner together. That bond was the most valuable thing I'd gained from the storm. Yesterday, Walter had sent me the final legal update. Everything was concluded. Vivian had received a 2-year prison sentence for forgery and fraud, along with an order to repay the full $340,000 she'd embezzled. Brennan Pierce, the man who'd only ever lived by leeching off others, got 1 year in prison and would be deported immediately after his sentence for visa violations. Even Rosalind hadn't escaped scrutiny. She was under investigation for aiding and abetting a criminal, and her husband had filed for divorce the moment he found out. Looking back at those faces now, I no longer felt burning hatred. I'd come to realize that revenge, no matter how sweet, ultimately leaves you empty. Freedom was everything. Freedom to start over. Freedom to never have to suspect the people in your own home. An email notification chimed from the laptop on my oak desk. I scanned the subject line. It was from a reputable headhunting firm representing a Seattle tech startup group. They wanted me as a senior strategic advisor for an ambitious new project. I smiled, feeling a surge of new energy flood my chest. One door had closed, but an entire horizon was opening. Dawn broke over the Will, painting the river bronze and gold. I stood on my balcony, coffee in hand, watching the light climb the bridges and touch downtown Portland. The air was cool, clean, and quiet in a way I hadn't known in years. The kind of quiet that didn't demand anything. That just was. At 57, I'd learned a few things. Patience is a weapon. Strategy beats emotion. And silence, real calculated silence, can dismantle an empire built on lies faster than rage ever could. Vivian thought she was the smartest person in the room. She thought I was too busy, too distracted, too old to notice. She thought a 28-year marriage was a long con she could cash out on whenever she got bored. She was wrong. Revenge, even when justified, doesn't fill the hole. It leaves behind. Watching her in handcuffs didn't bring back the years. It didn't erase the humiliation. It just closed a chapter that should have ended long ago, but it gave me clarity. I'd spent 3 decades building a life with someone who saw me as collateral, a financial instrument. When she was done, she tried to erase me from the deed, the accounts, the narrative. But I didn't disappear. Because here's the truth. Sometimes the only way to save your life is to blow it up. To stand in the rubble and decide that what comes next is yours and yours alone. Vincent transferred the house back. Walter closed the cases. Brennan got deported. Rosalind lost everything. Vivian got 2 years in a bill for $340,000. Justice had a price tag, but I didn't keep the house. Tomorrow was right. Too many ghosts. I sold it for $4.22 million and bought this place instead. 12 floors up overlooking the river, with room for 1 person and occasional guests. Smaller, simpler. Mine. My phone buzzed on the railing. Tomorrow morning, Dad. Pancakes at Blue Plate in 30. My treat. I smiled and typed back, "See you there." She'd flown in from San Francisco last night. Said she wanted to check on me, but I knew the truth. She wanted to make sure I wasn't just surviving, but actually living. And for the first time in a long time, I was. The sun cleared the horizon, flooding the balcony with light. I drained my coffee and turned back inside. There was a startup in Seattle that wanted my brain. A daughter who wanted pancakes, a river that would still be here tomorrow, and a life I was building from scratch, one honest, deliberate choice at a time. Vivian took 28 years from me. But the rest was all mine. And this time, I wasn't sharing the deed. My name is Warren Holloway, and this is my true story. I'm 57 years old now, and if there's one thing I've learned from 28 years of marriage that ended in handcuffs and betrayal, it's this. Don't be like me. Don't ignore the signs. Don't let loyalty blind you to the truth. Don't wait until your wife forges your signature and drains $340,000 before you wake up. I should have acted sooner. I should have asked the hard questions, but I was comfortable, distracted, too proud to admit my life was built on lies. Don't be like me. God gives us instincts for a reason. When your gut whispers that something's wrong, listen. When the numbers don't add up, investigate. When the person you love starts hiding their phone, their schedule, their heart, that's God telling you to open your eyes. I ignored him. I ignored the signs. And it cost me nearly everything. But God also gives us second chances. He gave me Vincent, a friend who stood by me when the ground collapsed. He gave me Tamara, a daughter who chose truth over comfort. And he gave me the strength to fight back, to reclaim my dignity, and to rebuild. This is one of those grandpa stories, the kind you tell to warn the next generation. These grandpa stories aren't always happy, but they're honest. And the best grandpa stories carry lessons that can save you years of pain. So here's my advice. Protect what you've built. Verify what you hold and never ignore what God is showing you. Because this true story, my true story, is also your warning. This true story didn't have to end in a courtroom. It could have ended in honesty years ago. Don't be like me. Learn from my mistakes. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.